Hey guys, Ranger Georgie here with U.S. Fish and Wildlife from Laguna, Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge in partnership with the City of Brownsville. Today what we're going to be doing is a Q&A with Dr. Hilary Swarts. With us also we have Raul Maraboto, City of Brownsville Athletic Supervisor. So Dr. Hilary Swarts, if you don't mind, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be able to tell people a little about ocelots. I am a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm located at Laguna, Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge, one of the prettiest places in Cameron County. And I guess I'm about 27 years into a career studying wildlife. I have worked with birds in Panama, monkeys in Central and South America, gorillas in Rwanda, foxes in Southern California. And after all of those exciting field experiences, I was ready to up my education a little and got a PhD in ecology at the University of California in Davis. And during that time, I started interning with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Sacramento in the regulatory branch. And it was a great job, but I was not wanting to stay inside forever. So I was very lucky to be offered this position as the Ocelot biologist here at Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge. And it's coming up on 7 years now. It's been very exciting. I've learned so much. I've had great interactions with the public, and we're always happy when people come out to the refuge.
Definitely. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and pass over the question category to Raul Maraboto. These questions were asked by citizens of the City of Brownsville, so they're hopefully going to give us a little bit more information and insight on ocelots. Raul?
Thank you, Hilary, for being with us. Without further ado or further delay here, we'll get right into it. We have a question that was submitted in by Justin Scholl, and his question is, what exactly is an ocelot?
Well, first of all, I'm so excited to know that members of the community are interested in knowing more about ocelots. They are a medium-sized wild cat that we have here in the Rio Grande Valley. In fact, it's one of the most beautiful animals you'll ever see, and it's incredibly special that that's something we have right here in our backyard.
Great. And question number 2 comes in from Giovanni de la Rosa, and he wants to know exactly how endangered are ocelots.
So that's a little bit of a complicated question. In Texas, which is the only place in the United States that has populations of ocelots, we estimate 80 or fewer individuals. So if you think for a second about what the number 80 is, right, you can probably name 80 people you know offhand. It's a pretty small number. And so they're very endangered here in the Rio Grande Valley. We have, a lot of construction, residents, farming, all of these things that are super important for our economy and our well-being, but they also don't really favor ocelot habitat, so that can be a big challenge for these animals and for those of us who are trying to keep them here in the valley. Ocelots are actually located in other parts of the world too, and in those parts of the world the numbers are maybe higher, but they're facing the same kinds of problems, right? Development, building, clearing of forests, all of those kind of issues.
Yeah, so we know, of course, deforestation creates a lot of issues for a lot of the ecosystem. So, I mean, obviously, we know that that'll affect it there.
And I think it's a good point to make too that the thorn scrub we have here, this great, forest habitat, it's important for the animals, but it's also important for people, right? We have a lot of storm events here, and we have a lot of rainfall. These natural areas are able to absorb a lot of that water in a way that, paved roads and developed areas aren't as able. So there are a lot of benefits to that habitat.
Yeah, and you touched up a little on this just briefly, but A question comes in from Mandy Gutierrez, and she asks, besides the Rio Grande Valley, where else can you find ocelots?
That's a great question. So we have a particular subspecies of ocelot here in Texas and to our south in the state of Tamaulipas. And then there are other subspecies that exist in Mexico, in Central America, in much of South America. And in fact, we occasionally get some males who are looking for a new home range, and maybe some females that come up from Mexico and the Sonora area into Arizona. So while that's not a full population in Arizona, they do have ocelots that show up on some of their remote cameras.
Just for some of our viewers at home, what would be the definition of a subspecies?
So that's a great question. And what it basically means is you can have an overall species like the ocelot, and then within that overall group, there are subgroups that are essentially genetically different enough from each other so that they become sort of uniquely adapted to the area where they live. So an interesting example maybe is that actually ocelots are amazing tree climbers and they're amazing swimmers. But here in South Texas, we don't have quite as much water, and we don't have quite as much of those big rainforest trees that you think about when you think of, Central and South America. So our ocelots have had to figure out how they can do their job as ocelots, right? Get food, find mates, protect their range in a slightly different kind of environment than maybe a rainforest with a really tall canopy where they're doing a lot more tree climbing and getting prey that way. So each subspecies is really important as its own entity because it's really evolved in the area where it lives. And so, for example, like, humans are all one species, so it's not a great example. But if you suddenly pluck me down in the middle of Beijing, right, in China, I'm not going to know how to speak Chinese, so I'm not going to be able to communicate with the people in the area. I'm not necessarily going to know where the best place to get food is. I'm not going to necessarily know what the threats are. So in a sort of similar way, right, humans are all one species and we don't have subspecies, but it's the same idea of kind of the ocelots in the Rio Grande know how to be ocelots in the Rio Grande, and we want to be able to protect that subpopulation.
So another question comes in from Andy Bolado, and he wants to know how many ocelots live at Laguna.
So we keep, anywhere from 30 to 50 trail cameras operating across the areas of the refuge that have ocelot habitat. And right now, if I'm remembering correctly, we have 15 individuals that we know. Each ocelot has a unique pattern on their fur, and we can use that to keep track of each one, right? We know who's who because of how their pattern is. Kind of like humans with our fingerprints. Each one is unique. So while we have 15, there's always the possibility that there are a couple more out there that we haven't detected. In fact, March of this year was a really exciting time for us because we were doing trapping and we caught a young female that we had never seen before. So that's one more in the population, which is really exciting. And then in March, at the end of March, we had a young male show up on camera that we've never seen before. So that's also really exciting. So I say 15, but with the hope that there are maybe a couple here and there that we haven't gotten on our cameras yet.
Awesome, that's great. And we have another question that comes in from Mike Cardenas, who wants to know what wildlife underpassings are.
Oh, that is a great question. Thank you so much. So one of the biggest threats that ocelots face here and everywhere is getting hit by cars when they're trying to move from one patch of good habitat to another good patch of habitat, right? To do that, they often have to go through our world, right? Where we've got roads and we've got shops and we've got homes and we've got farm fields. So when they get out on those roads, they don't know what to do. And because they mostly move around at night, right, when people are having a little bit reduced visibility when they're driving, unfortunately, they get hit by cars. That's the biggest, as far as we have records, that's the biggest known cause for ocelots dying in the Rio Grande Valley. So the Texas Department of Transportation has been a great partner with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and also working with UTRGV in Brownsville in trying to figure out how we can make these cats safer. And what's been done is installing these wildlife underpasses. So basically, you're trying to keep it so that you keep the cats off the surface of the road. And by building culverts and bridges that allow for easy travel underneath the road, and then also fencing along the side of the road so that when a cat gets to the edge of the road, they can't step right on the road. They follow the fence and hopefully find their way under to safety. So if you've driven along 100 in the past couple of years, State Highway 100, you've probably seen fencing on the sides there. There are 4 or 5 wildlife structures there, underpasses, and we've had all kinds of wildlife using them. And then if you've ever driven on FM 106, also known as General Brant Road, coming out from Rio Hondo toward the refuge or towards 510, we have 8 underpasses that Texas Department of Transportation installed there, along with the fencing, which you can see when you drive. And we've had also great use by all kinds of wildlife on those underpasses, including ocelots. We've had, I mean, you name it, bobcats, alligators, javelina, every once in a while, a random person. I'm not sure what they're doing under there. Tortoises, snakes, rabbits, raccoons, opossums, pretty much anything you can think of has made use of those wildlife underpasses. And you think about each time one of those animals goes under the road instead of over the road, they're reducing their risk of getting hit by a car. So that partnership with Texas Department of Transportation has been amazing. And then various groups like University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, Texas A&M Kingsville, some students out of San Marcos, they've all been working to monitor how these sites work. So there are cameras to tell us, are they using these underpasses? And we're really, really happy to see a lot of use by wildlife. Another thing to keep in mind is it's not just helpful for the wildlife, but there's a lot of property damage, personal injury, and unfortunately sometimes even fatalities from human beings driving and either unfortunately hitting something or swerving their car to avoid something and finding, you know, unfortunately that swerve turned out to be dangerous. So this is really a great action, I think, for wildlife health and for public health in terms of increasing the road safety for people and animals.
It sounds like they're pretty effective based on the information that you've given, and that they're probably beneficial for both the animals and any citizen that is in a vehicle.
I think that's what we're finding. And I think the other cool thing is the longer they're in place, the more comfortable the animals get with, you know, having it around them, right? Like it's like if somebody builds a new house in your neighborhood and at first you're not used to it being there, little by little you get used to it. It's the same thing with the wildlife. The more comfortable they become with the underpasses, the more likely they are to use them over time.
Yeah.
So we have another question that comes in from Jackie Airy, and she wants to know, why are ocelots so endangered?
Ooh, well, that's kind of a big question, but it's a really, really important one. So I'm really glad that Jackie asked that. The biggest cause, well, a lot of people know in the 60s and early 70s, it became very fashionable to have clothes, to have coats, to have hats that used sort of intriguing and interesting animal prints. And the ocelot's coat is beautiful. It's a really stunning animal. And unfortunately, that worked to the ocelot's disadvantage because a lot of people ended up killing ocelots to get the pelts. And we're talking, I mean, even imports from Mexico in the 100,000s in the 60s and 70s. So you think, when I say there are 80 here, it's estimated that it takes 40 ocelots to make a coat, to make one coat. So we only have 2 coats worth of ocelots here. Now, the great news is that laws have been enacted, like the Endangered Species Act and worldwide treaties such as CITES, that have moved to protect these cats. And that there's also really been a shift in people's kind of approach to fashion, and that popularity of those furs has really fallen out of fashion, which is great for the ocelots. But even so, you would think, right, once people stopped hunting them for their fur, that you would see the population go right back up. Unfortunately, the biggest threat that ocelots face right now is losing their habitat. So for all of you who live in the valley, you know that gorgeous dense thorn scrub that we have here that you wouldn't want to walk through for $1 billion, right? And even when we have to go in it for work, we're literally crawling on our bellies because it's so dense. So it's great habitat for the ocelot, but it's not really as compatible with human uses, right? You can't farm thorn scrub. You can't live in thorn scrub. You can't have a road made of thorn scrub. So all of these human pressures have resulted in a lot of brush loss. In fact, there's estimates that we have less than 5% of the thorn scrub habitat here in the valley than we did in the past. And so that loss of habitat is a really big problem, because if there's no space for ocelots, we can't get more ocelots. And it's not just the loss overall, it's losing it in different patches so that you get habitat fragments. So you get basically a patch of habitat here, a patch of habitat here, all over the place. And so like we talked about before, when I'm trying to go as an ocelot from one patch to another, I'm having to go through what's probably dangerous area for me. And so the loss and the fragmentation actually are what drive, you know, ocelots getting hit by cars. And it also means you end up with these smaller isolated subpopulations, and they have lower genetic diversity, which basically means that each one is more like the other than they are like other groups. And so that can have a really big effect, because your genetics can affect your immune system, right? So right now, as we all know, this county is in a real crisis with the coronavirus, and some people get hit harder. Some people don't show any symptoms. Unfortunately, some people don't make it. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we have different immune systems. And so having that variation, those different immune systems in your population, means that when a disease comes through, you have more ability to fight that at a big level. If all the ocelots in Laguna, Atascosa have pretty much the same genetics, then if we experience any kind of cat disease coming in, then it's a really big risk, because we don't necessarily have some individuals who are going to be much better at fighting that. And the other thing with the reduced genetic diversity is sometimes it can affect reproduction. So sometimes it's hard to test and it's hard to observe, because sometimes it's not saying, oh, they can't reproduce at all. It's saying that maybe they're not reproducing, maybe they're reproducing at 50% of what they could be reproducing. But that's so hard to test and so hard to detect. But certainly improving habitat availability, connecting those patches so that the cats face fewer risks and have better connectivity to exchange genetics, those are all things that we're working on with a lot of different partners to try to help the situation.
Great. And we have another question that comes in from Basilio Guerrero. And he wants to know how an ocelot compares to a regular house cat. Now, in size and I guess in the way that they feel as well.
Okay, I will do my best, but unfortunately the ocelots aren't very cooperative when I ask them how they're feeling. But I will say this, an average house cat is probably coming in, depending on how much meow mix it's getting, is probably coming in around 10 or so pounds, maybe a little less, sometimes a lot more. Ocelots, the ones we trap here in the valley, usually come in 23 pounds, 25 pounds, something like that. We had a male that we caught in the last year who was 29 pounds. That was a big boy. That one I was like struggling to carry him from the trap to the table. So they're definitely bigger. House cats have a little bit more point to their ears. Ocelots have a little bit more rounded ears. And as you know with cats, right, you can have an orange tabby, you can have a cat that's all black, you can have any number of different combinations. Even though their patterns are unique to them, like our fingerprints, generally ocelots have the same markings on them. So they're pretty distinct in that way. And how they differ? Well, your house cat gets a bowl of food put out every day, a bowl of water. They get veterinary care. They don't probably have any predators hanging around unless you let your cat outside. Whereas the ocelots, they've got to find their own food out there, hunt for it. If something happens to them, if they get sick, there's not a veterinarian on site, right? Being a wild animal is a tough game. So, so those are some of the differences. And then, as any of you who have house cats know, you get all kinds of personalities. I have a friend who has a house cat that has lived behind her stove for 5 years. She puts food out and it disappears, so she knows it's gone and gotten eaten, but she does not see her cat at all. I have a cat who every afternoon while I'm here working at home comes and helps me by typing things on the computer that I don't want to send. He almost sent an email with all N's to someone I didn't know, and I stopped him just in the nick of time. But so I guess what I'm trying to say, if you have some house cats who are not really, really excited to be around humans, and some house cats who are convinced they're one of you, right, and part of the family, and they hop up on the counter to see what you're cooking and all of that. As the rule, ocelots have individual personalities, but for the most part, they do not want anything to do with humans. They're not going to attack you. I can bet you $1 bazillion that they're going to see you and you're never going to see them, because they're very, very well camouflaged in their dense habitat. And for the most part, they just generally avoid humans and anything human. So they stay away from developed areas, they stay away from houses, they stay away as much as they can from anything that's going to kind of interrupt their sort of peaceful existence as solitary animals in their habitat.
I think it's safe to say that given the recent popularity from some shows on TV or Netflix and things like that, based on the information you've given, I think it would be smart to say that an ocelot would definitely not make a good pet.
You know, I'm so glad you make that point, because I understand the temptation. These amazing wild animals that, you know, we have so much awe for, and we see their strengths and we see their beauty. And so there's a temptation sometimes to say, ooh, I wish I had one of those in my backyard. And really, it's across the board with all wildlife species. They are terrible pets. First of all, everything's cute as a baby, right? And so, you know, people get sucked into it because, oh, look at this little baby, it could never do any harm. Well, as we all know, right, all of us started off as babies at one point, and we probably did a lot less harm than we do now. So when they grow up, they become well, they don't even become, they've been wild all along, but those behaviors start to come out. So, you know, if your dog is mad at you, maybe it gives you a pouty face, or maybe it barks at you. If a wild animal is mad at you, it could do something physical and it could hurt you. I mean, you're talking about something that has really no context for living with people. And so it becomes really dangerous. It becomes a good way to have all of your furniture shredded to bits. It becomes a good way to have your face shredded to bits. And then I think that's sort of the human perspective on it, right? And also there aren't a lot of veterinarians who are trained in these exotic animals. So if something happens, you don't really have any way to help them. And then think about this, which I think that none of us were counting on, that we've been asked to stay in our homes as much as possible over the course of the past few months, right? In trying to keep our community safe from the coronavirus. And we've seen ample evidence of how frustrating that is to people, right? I mean, being stuck in your house all the time, and your house has food and TV and a comfortable bed and all kinds of nice amenities, Wi-Fi, washer, dryer, what have you, if you're lucky. But even those amenities don't make up for the difference of being able to walk out of your house and explore the world in the way you want to. And you think about these wild animals, that's what they do, right? Their whole world is exploring their range, keeping an eye on, oh, it looks like oh, there's a new poop over here. Is somebody else coming into my home range? Or, oh, look, this tree is starting to fruit. Maybe I'm going to be able to get something good from that. Ocelots don't eat fruit, but other wildlife, right? So being free is a really important part of them being healthy animals. Wild animals that get put in captivity show all kinds of very sad behaviors and show depression, they show anxiety. So even though you might think to yourself, oh, well, if I build a big enough pen and I give this animal all the food it can use and some stuffed animals to play with, it's just really not going to create for them the world that they were born to be in. So there are so many great pets that we already can get: dogs, cats, people have rabbits, people have tortoises, people have all kinds of animals that are considered to be good pets. Wild animals are not one of those.
And I like that you brought up that topic about the way they look, because if you go to the zoos, I mean, that's the way they're treated very well.
Yeah, I think zoos are tough that way, because a lot of us get our experiences with wild animals through zoos, and zoos do a lot of what we call ex situ, which means not at the zoo, conservation efforts. For example, the Houston Zoo is a big help to our local ocelot research here in the wild. And a lot of zoos have actually a mandate to make sure that they're funding efforts for conservation out in the wild. But it's also, I mean, I know for me, the first wild animals I saw, besides like the squirrels and raccoons in my Connecticut backyard, were at the zoo. And so it's figuring out that balance. But I think zoos are uniquely positioned and designed and outfitted to give the best possible care they can to these captive animals. And I think something people don't maybe know is that animals in zoos have not been collected from the wild for the most part for many, many, many years. So you're talking about not going out into the wild and grabbing an ocelot and putting it in a cage. You're talking about the whole national organization of zoos organizing their captive breeding so that there are animals in zoos that are as healthy as possible without anyone having to go into the wild and take yet another individual from the population.
Yeah, I imagine that would be similar to bringing an ocelot into the zoo that's from the wild, like a culture shock for that ocelot coming in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And especially animals like cats that, you know, very much an inherent part of their behavior is patrolling around, roaming around, covering a lot of physical area. The zoos aren't doing that anymore. They're not taking animals from the wild, recognizing what a problem that is, and recognizing how important it is that the ones that are in the wild stay in the wild. So I think, you know, sometimes people see a zoo and they think, oh, well, you know, I could do that at my home and I could build this enclosure, I could do this. It's really not, it's not realistic. If you could see even the food bill of a zoo on a monthly basis, we're talking tens, hundreds of $1,000s a day to keep those animals fed. That's not including all the labor of the people who are taking care of them, all the veterinary care, all of the enrichment that's done to try to keep them occupied in that pretty limited space. So I think it's, you know, it's great to go to the zoo and see some of the amazing creatures we have on this planet, but having one in your own backyard, I can assure you, is going to cause you heartache, financial difficulty, possibly personal injury or worse, and it's going to cause that animal to have a really, I would say, compromised life experience.
So one of the last questions that we have here is from Claudia Martinez, and she wants to know what an ocelot's diet is like.
Okay, well, one thing that's cool about ocelots, while I mentioned before that they're really specific in the place that they like to live in their habitat, which is that Tamaulipan thorn scrub that we know, they're very specific about that, but they're very general in what they'll eat. So we see, basically there are studies where people collect the scats or poops from ocelots and look at what's in them to try to understand their diet better. And the ocelots at Laguna, I think it was a 15-year study, they found birds like roadrunners, green jays, there were lizards, there are lots and lots of different rodent species, they'll eat snakes, they'll eat rabbits, although not as much as people think. The bobcats tend to eat the rabbits a little bit more. But basically the ocelots, they're looking for any kind of relatively small size prey. Like they're not going to eat an armadillo. They're not going to try to take a deer down. They're not going to try to take, you know, a little kid down, right? They're looking at something that's pretty small. And something that's really cool, I kind of talked about earlier that they're really well adapted for climbing trees. They're one of 3 species of cats whose back ankles actually can rotate. So, you know, like if your house cat gets caught in the tree, you got to call the fire department, or else they're just going to free fall it down and it's anyone's guess how it's going to go. Ocelots can actually turn their back ankles to grip the tree while they're climbing down. So it's super cool because they can climb up and they can be looking for prey, and then they can climb down in a controlled descent and also be looking for prey. So they have a lot of great skills for getting those prey items.
Being that we're lucky to live here in the Rio Grande Valley, and that's where the ocelots call home, what are some things that the public can do to for the betterment of the ocelot population?
That's a great question, and I think it's especially great to have it at this local level, because there are, you know, people give money to organizations, people support, they, you know, do all kinds of stuff, but the people who live here in the Rio Grande Valley are really the most important part of ocelot conservation. So you can decide to not clear all the brush on your land if you're someone lucky enough to have land. You can support ocelots through our Friends of Laguna Atascosa National Wildlife Refuge group. In fact, I have a license plate on my car from them that has an ocelot on it, and the proceeds from that go to Ocelot research. So those are some things you can do. Definitely educating people, telling your friends and family that they're here. I'm always so surprised when I find out someone who's lived here their whole life didn't even know that they had these amazing cats, like literally in our backyard. And then I think the most important thing at the local level is to be careful when you're driving. So if you're driving during the day, of course you want to be careful too, but specifically to ocelots, they're active basically when we're kind of calling it a night. So when it starts to get dark, they're starting to wake up. They're starting to go find their breakfast. They're trying to find out what's going on in their home range. And they're moving around a lot, basically from nightfall until the sun comes up. And so that's when they might be on roads. So I really encourage people when they're driving, especially when it's darker out, and especially when there's brush around them, to be really vigilant, to really look where they're driving. It's not the time to kind of go down and check your texts, and which probably you shouldn't do anyway, or spend a bunch of time fumbling with the radio. Do people even have car radios anymore? I don't know. But it's a time to be really focusing on the road. When I drive, I probably look like a total weirdo, but this is how I drive at night. Because I'm basically trying to scan not just the middle of the road, but those side areas in case something pops out, right? You know, when animals dart into the road, it's like that. And so the better you're able to handle that situation by maintaining a reasonable speed, having your high beams on when there isn't another car coming at you, scanning the road, really carefully scanning the sides of the road, you have a better chance of avoiding being, you know, in the unfortunate position of hitting one of these animals. And, you know, that serves well for all wildlife.
No, well, thank you so much for joining us. I think the information that was passed down was pretty good. I think the public did a great job on answering questions that, you know, do shine a lot of light on ocelots.
Yeah, I was really happy to hear all those questions and to know that many people submitted questions and were curious. That's a really hopeful and optimistic sign for me that this community cares about the natural resources that, you know, we're the stewards of these species. And if we don't care about them, who's going to care about them? So having people who are interested in learning and knowing more, that's a huge step in helping these animals stay here in the Rio Grande Valley. And I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's an honor to share this time with you, and thank you for doing this program.
All righty, well, sounds good. Guys, I hope you all learned something. I hope you enjoyed this. Stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have more programs for you guys all summer.
See you guys.
Right.
Thank you.
Good deal. Thank you so much, Hilary. I appreciate it.